we are hearing different voices coming out of the government and coming out of the Democratic Party and from the Biden administration. What's going on? Do you understand what's going on in Washington?
No, and I don't think the president of the United States understands what's going on in Washington. And I'm not sure, and this is really worrisome and concerning, I'm not sure he's capable of parsing the debate in Washington, if you will. He should be on top of it. He should be controlling it. He should be orchestrating it in some way, fashion, or form, and ultimately producing his policy. But I don't see the team he's got around him as being good enough to do that. And I see the people who are around him, both Democrat and Republican, as being not interested any more than I think he is in U.S. national security interests. That's the real key, as John Mearsheimer keeps saying, and I agree with John on this. I agree 100%. We are not doing anything right now from the president's office, from the National Security Council, from the Congress of the United States. We are not doing anything that is fundamentally in our national security interests. We're doing all manner of things that are not in our national security interests, to include the genocide in Gaza, supporting it and enabling it. And that's the key word. We are enabling it. And we're not doing anything that looks like it might have a sane result and some kind of agreement for a ceasefire and maybe ultimately a peace agreement in Ukraine. And at the same time, we're reaching out. And here's a sign of Biden's desperation, I think. Today I was told, and I don't doubt this, look at all the vituperation that he has exchanged with Xi Jinping and the statements he's made about China, scaring me to death, really, in terms of Taiwan and other places. And here we're welcoming the Chinese into talking with Fatah and Hamas and try the element of the Palestinian Authority, Fatah and Hamas, so that we can try and get a better hostage deal or a better ceasefire deal or whatever. We're actually asking China for its good offices between Hamas and Fatah. Now, as a diplomat and as a person I think reasonably sane, I welcome that. But it's an indicator of how desperate they are. Badmouth China from one end of the street to the other, and then ask them to come in and act in good office fashion with Fatah and Hamas. It's policy all over the place, if it can even be dignified by the name of policy.
Clearly, you talk about Gaza. We've learned that in Rafah, they're trying to attack the eastern part of Rafah. Do you know why they're trying to do what's in the eastern part of Rafah that they want to attack? Is there
well, I can only assume that their intelligence shows them that the highest concentration of Hamas fighters, real fighters left, not women and children, but real fighters, is there. And so that's where they're going. At the same time, I look at this business of, okay, you've got to move, and you got to move to this humanitarian area we're going to give you to move to, and we're going to attack, and we're going to get all the Hamas people, and we're not going to bother you. Well, where are you going afterwards? And where are you going to, in terms of what we're going to create if we do what we did in Khan Yunis and elsewhere in Gaza? How are you going to move? How are you going to get from point A to point B if what we've done is closed off any avenue of exit or entrance? I don't understand this. I don't understand the strategy. I don't understand the tactics. I really don't understand what Netanyahu is intending to do here, except I think, as I said, he wants to finish off as much of the real Hamas fighters as he can, and intelligence is telling him where they are. It might have something to do with the hostages, too. We were very close to a deal. I was just trying to figure out a few minutes ago if we had actually achieved something. And one person told me, yes, we have. And another person said, no, Hamas has agreed, but Israel hasn't agreed. So apparently we're still working the details of that. And that's the hostage and prisoner exchange. So what is he doing with this assault on Rafah, to aid and abet that, or to destroy it completely? Doesn't make any sense. You can't be doing the two things at the same time if part of the agreement is a ceasefire, no matter how short it might be. I hope it's longer. I hope it's a permanent ceasefire, but I doubt it will be. But all these things don't add up right now.
new polls show that 58% of Israelis want an immediate resignation of Netanyahu. This shows how the continuation of this conflict in that region is working for him and his administration, and why he's trying to continue this conflict.
I think that's true in its general sense. He knows as long as the war is being waged and he's the one seen as waging it most effectively by the most Israelis, he's safe. But he didn't have the highest poll ratings when we went into this before October the 7th, and was only holding his coalition, such as it is, together with the help of some really rabid characters like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and others. And I don't even think in my worst thoughts about Bibi Netanyahu that ethically and morally and fundamentally he is where they are. Now, he's tried to prove he is over the last 6 months. He's tried to prove he is, and even I might be a believer before it's over with. But I think he would like to be somewhere a little bit further towards the center than where he is right now. But he's there because, as you said, he doesn't want to go to jail and he wants to stay in office. I think the poll ratings are really misleading in that sense because he's actually been lower than that before, and he's won office back by making a coalition, whatever, peeling to the right mostly. So I don't know if that means anything right now, unless there is a group within Likud that, almost like in other type of democratic system, like the British have, for example, gives a vote of no confidence that says, you're gone, man, walk out of here. You know, they can do almost anything. They don't have a constitution. The Knesset is all powerful when it comes down to it. And Likud is in possession of at least a majority, it looks like, still in the Knesset. So they could kick him out and declare elections, or simply put another person in there as a president pro tem. They don't have a constitution, so they can do almost anything they want to. I don't know. I don't know what that would do, though. I really don't, because they seem to be bound and determined to take this last shot at what they think. Clearly, they do think that there are a lot of Hamas hardcore fighters still remaining, and that they have somewhat of a military opportunity to get to them and rid themselves of them. And that's where they want to go. And frankly, I don't think they give a damn about the aftermath in Gaza. I know Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, and others do. I don't know how much Netanyahu has bought into that. They want to settle Gaza. They want to start immediately. In fact, they probably have already started. They want to settle Gaza. They want the Palestinians gone, totally gone. They don't care where they go or who they go to, but they want them gone, and they want to settle Gaza. And they want Israeli settlements in Gaza, just like those in the West Bank. Now, their fallback position is they will take Israeli settlements in Gaza, just like the West Bank, with Palestinians scattered around. They'll get rid of those Palestinians, just as they're doing in the West Bank, as time goes by. That's their ultimate plan. They would prefer to have them almost totally eradicated to start with, but that's their plan if they can't do that. And it's looking more and more like they are not going to be able to do that. There's a lot of unrest right now in places like Jordan, in places like Egypt, even in Saudi Arabia. Some friends in Riyadh are telling me there's unrest there too. And these people who've been saying, no, nothing will happen in any of the Arab capitals because their populations are just quiescent. Whatever they want to do, they do with their populations. I'm hearing different words from certain people who know the region better than I. And they're saying, no, the people are restive. In Jordan in particular, they're restive. In Egypt in particular, they're restive. So these leaders have to pay attention to this population that is huge and can get rid of them if it really wanted to. So it's not like it's nothing anymore. You've got a lot of dissension in the region and a lot of opposition in the region, and the opposition in the world to the United States and its policies in enabling Israel to do this is growing. I don't doubt for a moment that the conversations in Beijing that would get Xi Jinping to okay China coming in and talking to the two elements, Fatah and Hamas, wasn't a rather testy session, because yes, China would like to get into the region. Yes, China would like to be more formidable in the region. Yes, China would like it to be a diplomatic entree, and they would like to show off their good offices and to Washington, which I don't care. Do it if it works. But at the same time, it's dicey for them. It's dicey for them, and just to say that, well, our shipping's being impacted in the Red Sea, therefore we need to help with this. We need to try and get this squared away, and we need to get it ended. And the United States is showing absolutely no proclivity or skill to do this at all, so we need to move in there. The fact that Biden and Blinken apparently have welcomed, that's what I heard today, that was the word, welcomed China's good offices, tells me that people are desperate. Xi Jinping, on the one hand, maybe to get in there and bloody his hands with this, or muddy his hands with it, maybe, and Biden and others to acquiesce in it. This is like saying to our most formidable national security threat, China, it's like saying, we can't do anything about this. Would you help us? That's not like Washington.
We've seen that China's role since the conflict in Ukraine started is changing. It's changing drastically. We've seen that they cut a deal between Iran and Saudis. And right now they're trying to bring Hamas and Fatah in these two groups together to make some sort of agreement. How do you see the role of China in this new era of changing?
I think a number of things. And let's go back just a moment to your comment about Iran and Saudi Arabia. If you really want to scratch Washington's neoconservatives hard and get the scabs off the wounds, they hate Tehran more than they hate Beijing. Beijing is a big economic challenge, a big specter out there, and it threatens that tiny little island of 23 million democratic people called Taiwanese. That's sort of pro forma for China. With Iran, it's visceral hatred. John Bolton would like to go to Iran and dance on the Ayatollah's grave. That's how serious it is with some of these people. So don't ever think that we hate China like we hate Tehran. That's just the reality of the situation. That's not every American, and it's not every member of the Biden administration, or it wouldn't be every member of a Trump administration. But it's enough people to make the policy demented. And that's what our policy towards Tehran is. So that's why we, oh, no, nobody talks to Tehran unless we give them permission to. China's interest in the region is economic. It's base road initiative type development. It's, I got lots of money. I want to turn that money into more money. I want to do this. I want to do that. But I also have this interest in, and the United States has given, Washington has given me an unprecedented opening to do this, that we're better than Washington. That when you sign up to us, they may tell you that we're predatory. They may tell you that we're going to steal your farms. We're going to do this. We're going to do that with your labor force. But we're better than Washington. And let us demonstrate. Just give us an opportunity to demonstrate with our diplomatic prowess, with our economic prowess, with our financial prowess, with our agricultural prowess, whatever it might be. Give us a chance to demonstrate. And if you don't like this aspect of it, we'll back up a little bit and you tell us what you want. That's kind of China's approach now. And it's working. It's working. And it's working as much as anything because of Washington's errors, mistakes, drastic mistakes like this unbridled, unquestioned support for Israel. While Tony Blinken cries in his milk, and others do, and Biden sometimes cries in his milk over the horrors that are taking place, they haven't turned off a single bomb, a single bullet. They haven't turned off anything. So China's got a wonderful opportunity here to show us up as the biggest hypocrites on the face of the earth. And that's what they're about. Their diplomatic prowess is going to aim at showing the rest of the world what insane people live in Washington. And they've got a marvelous opportunity to do that with regard to Gaza, and to a lesser extent, but growing every day, with regard to Ukraine, because that is a lost situation too. And yet we're hanging on to it. The greatest strategic failures in history have usually happened around countries, armies that don't realize or don't want to realize that they're being defeated. And so what they do is they double down or triple down. They reinforce strategic failure. And then the failure becomes catastrophic. In this case, the failure becomes NATO collapses, falls apart. Washington has no more hegemony over Europe. Europe stands up its own security identity in desperation, and it's a very fractured security identity because it isn't an alliance. It's France, it's Germany, it's Norway, it's Sweden, and they're all going off on their own separate ways, and that's not probably very good for Europe. But that's what we're headed for if we don't stop this insanity in Ukraine. And China's just watching and saying, okay, we'll backfill there too. You want us to negotiate the peace treaty in Ukraine? We'll backfill there because look, we're telling you, the rules-based order that Washington keeps claiming is the way the world ought to run is a disaster. How can you not see that it's a disaster? Look at Gaza, look at Ukraine, look at Libya before, look at Afghanistan, look at Iraq. It's a disaster. We're taking over.
When you look at the conflict in Ukraine, since conflict started, if their main enemy is China, we can argue that everything they did since the conflict in Ukraine started was in favor of China.
Every single bullet fired, every single artillery round expended, every single drone shot down, everything is drawing away from, here again, Mearsheimer's right, the main threat, if there is a main threat in the world, China. It's drawing away from that. Not only that, it's not only depleting our resources while theirs remain intact and growing, it is also forcing Iran, North Korea, Moscow, and Beijing into an alliance. More and more formal alliance every day that goes by, every day that Ukraine keeps ticking over, and every day that Gaza keeps ticking over, they think more solidly about an alliance and about formally opposing the crazy people in Washington.
And not only Russia and Iran, we can see that in the Middle East, these Arab states who are so important for the United States, they are perceiving that the world is changing. It comes to a moment that they would go with China. I think, in my opinion, that's
22 countries and almost 400 million people
that the United States has to think about.
Yes. And we haven't even mentioned what I call intermediate powers, almost in some cases near peer powers like India. We haven't even mentioned them, who are all watching this and all taking note of the insane asylum in Washington and all taking note of who the inmates are in that asylum and all taking note of what's coming in November. A 80-plus-year-old dude who might drop dead at any moment, and a guy who's got so many trials going on right now he can't see straight, who eats Big Macs for lunch, breakfast, and supper. This is crazy, and they know it's crazy, and they know they can read the tea leaves. They know that we are diminishing our own power at a rate that probably ranks with any of the empires in the world that have collapsed in this way before. We are just doing it to ourselves. They don't have to raise a finger. They don't have to do anything. They are coming together, though, in more and more ways that really concern me. North Korea in particular concerns me because we're paying no attention to Kim Jong-un. That gets him more angry than anything else when he doesn't have any place on the world stage. He's just declared to his people, he's just declared that the United States is no longer a focus, no longer. That you follow up with, now my focus is on South Korea and unifying the peninsula. That's what my granddaddy wanted to do. That's what the whole Kim dynasty wanted to do. We need to reunify the peninsula. We have nuclear weapons. Russia has made us have even better nuclear weapons. We're going to reunify this peninsula. And we don't care about those people over there in that town called Washington, because they've shown that they don't care about us. They won't even talk to us now. We haven't even had any dialogue of consequence with the North Koreans. And he hates that. And that's the way to get him really riled up. That's the way to get him to start attacking fishing boats and doing all manner of things on the two sides of the peninsula. I understand right now there's some possible action going to go on the western side of the peninsula. Last time it was on the eastern side. But we're not even paying a whole lot of attention to it, other than our commander in Seoul. And I suspect he's probably, pulling what hair he has left out, because he knows he's sitting on a powder keg, and a powder keg that now is allied almost formally with Moscow and Beijing. We could always go to Beijing and we could bring pressure on the North Koreans to an extent. We could always go to Moscow and we could bring a little pressure on Pyongyang to an extent that was often calming of the waters. No more. Nope. You can't go to Moscow and say, oh, your buddies there in North Korea are doing these dastardly things. Please help us. Nobody's listening. And in Beijing, nobody's listening either. It's a problem. It's a real problem, and no one's paying a whole lot of attention to it. I listened to Korean experts whom I met when I was at State Department and got to really respect and listen to. And I think some of them are like with their hair on fire right now, but there's a reason for their hair to be on fire, because they've been peninsula trackers for 30, 40 years. Some of them have lived in Pyongyang even, and they say things are different there now. They've never seen Kim Jong-un absolutely, or a Kim, all the way from Kim Il-sung to Kim Jong-un. They've never seen a North Korean leader not interested in the United States anymore and publicly stating it. Well, that says he's written us off.
She was in France and he was talking about the conflict in Gaza and said that two-state solution is the official policy of China. And we know that Russia has the same kind of policy in Gaza. Do you think that are we gonna have these superpowers making some sort of difference for Gaza? Because it's so important. The situation is so dire in Gaza. And
I'd like to think so. In fact, as you were saying that, I was thinking, how about a two-state solution for Ukraine? Russia on one side and Ukraine on the other side. That'd be a pretty good solution too. An obvious solution. Neutrality for Ukraine. I think Russia has always coveted our role in the Levant. The Soviet Union, Russia. They always wanted to gain some inroads. The only place where they gained significant inroads was with Syria, and a little bit with Iran. But it's not serious. It's not significant. Now, I don't know how much Putin, embroiled as he is now with the southern flank and the threat of terrorism, which is very real from places there, and the Ukraine conflict and Washington's insanity and the nuclear weapons that are possessed by both sides. That's got to be giving him a lot of concern. No treaties, nothing at all, no hotline, nothing. Got to be giving him some concern. Any sane leader in the world would be really worried, probably first and foremost, about all these nuclear weapons, to include the ones in Israel, which we don't even admit are there. Not a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, not a possessor of nuclear weapons in official capacity, but every damn person in the world knows they've got them. This is a very dangerous situation we set up with these nuclear weapons. So Putin's got that on his mind. Xi's got that on his mind, and we should have it on our mind. But the only way we have it on our mind is spending trillions of dollars to enrich the little niche complex within the military-industrial complex that makes nuclear weapons and all the paraphernalia that go with them. We're not thinking, as we did throughout the Cold War, about how dangerous these weapons are. Let me paint a scenario for you. Let's just say, forget Taiwan for a minute. Let's just say that we have another brouhaha like we've had with the Vietnamese. I don't know how that's going to resolve itself. The Vietnamese have a tendency to stand up to the Chinese. You remember back there a few years ago when China invaded Vietnam and the Vietnamese handed them their rear end and sent them packing, mainly because the Vietnamese had just finished us off. And they were very, very good. Their army was very, very good. It beat the Chinese pretty swiftly. But that wasn't a huge invasion or anything. But it did teach the Chinese not to, pick on the Vietnamese unless they were really serious. Well, they're in a fight with them right now. It's everything from fishing rights in the South China Sea to oil and other things, but it is contentious. Well, what China does is it sends about 45 or 50 of its fishing boats, all of which are armed to the teeth, and it surrounds you, your fishing fleet or whatever you might, oil rig, whatever it might be. And think about something like that happening with the Philippines, with Vietnam, with whom we're increasingly close. And all of a sudden, we start to assert freedom of navigation and do the kinds of things we do over there. Or imagine what happened in April of 2001 when the EP-3 U.S. reconnaissance plane and the Chinese F-8 fighter, with one of their very best veteran pilots in it, collided, killed the pilot. And the EP-3 had to go down on Hainan Island with some very secure gear on board. And Hainan Island is one of the most militarized part of China, sub pins and everything. So, and we were very close to having a real emergency there. Well, Powell got it softened really quick because he got in touch with Chen Chi-chen and others in the leadership and said, you know, we got to work this out. We can't have this leading to war. We don't have Powells. We don't have people like that now. So let's say an incident happens. It doesn't even have anything to do with Taiwan. And all of a sudden it gets blown out of the water. Well, let's just face the fact that we don't even have enough Navy and enough Air Force in that Navy. Best we could probably do would be put 2 carriers in there, and the Chinese would sink those 2 carriers within 48 hours of their coming into the South China Sea if they thought they were really going to do anything threatening to China. That'd be what they do right off the bat. They put torpedoes in there. They put sea skimming missiles in there. They put high velocity altitude down diving missiles in there. The carriers would be gone. You'd have 10,000 Americans in the water or dead, probably a combination of the two. You couldn't even pick them all up because we don't have enough berth spaces on the escort ships to pick them up. So what do you do then? Well, I'll tell you what we do. We go nuclear just to teach them a lesson. People think that is unimaginable, unfathomable. Well, people haven't played in the games I played in, the simulations I played in. They don't know how their leaders think, and they don't know how other leaders think, and they don't know how desperate people become politically, prestige-wise, and other when they start losing badly, really, really badly. And that's what we're talking about here, because we're fighting on their terrain, in their area, against their strength. And right now, frankly, our strength does not match their strength given that situation. Now, if it was out in the Atlantic or the Pacific or whatever, I'd have a different analysis. But if we're fighting in their lake, think of the South China Sea as the Gulf of Mexico for the U.S. That's kind of the way they look at the South China Sea. There's no Monroe Doctrine for the South China Sea. Oh, yes, there is. It's called the 9-dash line. And they look at that the same way we look at the Gulf. So it would be really easy to start something there and have it go nuclear fairly fast. And we're not thinking about these things at a time when we can't even recruit for our Army. We can't recruit for our Navy. We can't recruit for our Air Force. The Marine Corps, the smallest of the services other than the Coast Guard, is the only one that's even barely met its quotas. The Coast Guard isn't meeting its quotas. We are hurting right now from a military perspective, and yet look what we're doing. We're making all these enemies in the world. We're isolating and separating ourselves from traditional allies like Turkey. I would say even India. If I were India, I would have some real circumspection about whether I wanted to stay very close to the United States. There are lots of other people in the world like China and Russia to get close to. It's just not a very good situation for us. I agree with John Mearsheimer again, the realist amongst us, that we are doing everything in our power to make ourselves isolated and in harm's way. And it doesn't have to be. That's what makes it so crazy, is it doesn't have to be. We could be doing things very, very differently.
Are we going to have some sort of escalations in Ukraine? Because the Russian general staff announced that they're going to have some exercises. In these exercises, they're going to have the use of non-strategic nuclear weapons. And it seems that they're responding to NATO, and they're talking about putting troops on the ground in Ukraine. How dangerous is the situation in Ukraine? Is Ukraine that important to risk a nuclear war?
No. In a word, no. We're into the realm now of my doctrine is this and my doctrine is this, and you do this and I'll do that, and the sort of tit for tat. But when we were watching really large Russian exercises in 2013 and 2014, they were developing the strategy, and this was against a NATO incursion. That was what they were exercising against, a major NATO excursion into the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the Russian, if you will, complement of NATO. And everyone said, oh, the Swedes, the Finns, and everyone, us, we all said, oh, that's preposterous, but they've got to exercise, so they got to have their orange. We used to call it country orange that we were fighting. We knew it was the USSR, but country orange. Well, they got to have their country orange, so they got to have their enemy to exercise against. But we were somewhat alarmed when we saw that their doctrine was evolving to the point of, if the incursion by NATO was so significant, they thought our PGM, they thought our ability to put PGM's, precision guided munitions, on them was so great that the only way they could counter that and overwhelm it. Now, that's changed a little bit now that they've been making some of their own and buying some of their own. But the only way they could counter it was with tactical nuclear weapons. And so they would hit the flanks of the penetration and the nose of the penetration, and they would blunt it. And it was called escalate to de-escalate, because they said then NATO would get the message that we're really serious and they would stop. Well, all of our escalation theory during the Cold War said that wasn't the way it was going to be, that if you did that, you'd get more nukes back on top of you. But that was their doctrine, and that's scary. That's scary. And if they're talking about that, they're just exercising that, sort of, given the situation in Ukraine right now. You do something out of Ukraine or in Ukraine that threatens where we are right now, which is winning. Unequivocally, we are winning. Unequivocally, we're winning. You do something to disturb that by putting, major NATO forces in there. Someone said the other day, Macron was thinking about sending the French Foreign Legion. I said, okay, send the French Foreign Legion. They'll disappear too in about a week. But if we did anything really formidable, I wouldn't put it past. I wouldn't say that the Russians wouldn't convince Putin that they needed to do this doctrine. They needed to show us that they were serious. And so 2 or 3 small yield, medium nuclear weapons would be used. Well, I don't think that would stop. I don't think that would stop. I think we would be on the escalation ladder then, and we just go on. Here again, Ukraine presents the most viable, the most likely place on earth right now. And I'm counting in Pakistan, I'm counting in the Korean Peninsula, I'm counting in Israel itself, who's always dicey when it comes to talking about nuclear weapons. It's probably, Ukraine is probably the one place I could see a likely nuclear use scenario developing and not being able to be stopped. So that's another reason to get it shut down.
There is an article written by a British think tank. In this article, it says that the war in Ukraine is the war of attrition, is not the war of maneuver. And we got it wrong all over in this war. That's
Bingo.
why Russia is winning. That's unbelievable.
Russians got it wrong too. The Russians got it wrong too in the beginning. They thought it would be that way too, and they reacted better than we did.
And right now, many people I don't know if you saw, I talked with Paul Carrick-Roberts. He was so concerned about the use of nuclear bombs. He said that Russia has to put an end to this mess as soon as possible because this can get nuclear. This is his argument.
Yeah, it's back to Clausewitz again. War has a dynamic all of its own, and that dynamic sometimes can change on a 24-hour basis. Ask Napoleon. And Napoleon, after all, was Clausewitz's real model when he was watching Napoleon's battles. That's when he wrote Vom Krieg on war. And he took a lot of his lessons about warfare from Napoleon, but he moved them up into the stratosphere, so to speak. They're lessons for all time, most of them. And the most valuable lesson is his lesson about you must know the nature of the war you're involved in before you get involved in it. And you must realize that the nature of that war can change on a daily basis. And you must be aware of that change. You must accommodate that change. And sometimes the accommodation is to quit. The accommodation is to fold your marbles, fold your tent and take your marbles back and go home, or make the best peace treaty you possibly can. Other times you apply maximum power at the enemy's now revealed chief weakness and you overwhelm him. This isn't happening here, except on a very grinding, attrition-like scale. And Russia has the grinder, and Russia's not being attrited like Ukraine is. So the dynamics of this war have become almost like World War I, almost like trench warfare, almost like you had one side in that suddenly overwhelmed the other side for whatever reason. In this case, it's men, material, size, the whole ball game we all talked about in the first place. 150 million population country against a 40 million population country. This does not work very well. And with the industrial might that Russia has versus what Ukraine might have had at one time, which was mostly Russian, it just didn't work. So where are we now? Well, we're at a point, as I've said before, where Russian generals must be thinking. And they talk to Putin. And Putin might be getting proposals that he never thought were possible. And these are, very interesting proposals, like taking Odessa, like cutting off the entire Black Sea from Ukraine, like teaching them a lesson, not only not letting them back into Crimea, but taking everything else away from them. And that's when it starts getting very, very dangerous, because Putin is doing what the dynamics of war tell him he can do, and the blood he's expended has let him do, but others on the other side can't go that far. And so you wind up doing things like you should never do. Rule, absolutely sacrosanct rule during the Cold War. 2 nuclear weapons owning states never confront each other on the battlefield. That was sacrosanct. You just lived by that. You could have proxy wars, but like we're having in Ukraine, but you didn't confront your enemy on the battlefield if you were a nuclear weapon owning state, and he was too. Are we going to defy that? Are we eventually going to do what Macron seems to want to do, the latter-day Charles de Gaulle, pipsqueak Charles de Gaulle? Do we want to put NATO in Ukraine? Do we want to save our prestige at any cost? Because that is a recipe for nuclear war. And that's what Paul Craig Roberts and others are talking about. They're right.
Larry, Ukrainian Prime Minister said that Ukraine is one step away from being invited to NATO. And in this whole situation, in this whole mess in Ukraine, do you think behind the scene, are they giving promises to Ukraine that they're gonna be part of NATO? And because there have to be some sort of roots for these type of talkings. How do
Well,
you
here's
see
another,
it?
here's another divisive element that's going to shave NATO apart. It doesn't matter if Paris says it, or Berlin even, or London. It has to be Washington. And if Washington says it, then I need the key to the asylum, because I want to go in there too. It's just insane, utterly insane. And yet I could see it happening. I could see it happen. That's what frightens me so much. I could see it happening. I could see us being so desperate, especially just prior to the election, if it's looking grim for Biden in any way, fashion, or form, his health, the election itself, or whatever. I could see the prestige issue and the election issue being so paramount in his mind that he's willing to save Ukraine by entering the war. And that's the end of the issue, I think, and maybe the end of us all. That's what scares me. I'm not scared for myself. I mean, I'm 80 years old, but I'm scared for my children and my grandchildren and the rest of the people on this planet who don't have a clue 99% of them have a clue what I'm talking about. Don't have a clue that they're in danger, existential danger. Don't talk about the climate change. I mean, that's years away in terms of its existential nature, although in this country it's looking more and more like on the southern coast it might be right upon us. Ask those people in Texas who are, having semis washed off their highways. They don't know it, though. The majority of the world does not know it. Maybe there's some people out there who can intuit it because they see Washington being so stupid and so stubborn and so idiotic and insane. But at the same time, I don't think they understand just how dangerous that is. It comes back, I think I told you this one time before, I was talking to Ricardo Alarcon in a prestige house, or a protocol house outside of Havana. And it was 2 a.m. in the morning, and he's drinking really good Johnny Walker Scotch, Blue Label, I think, and we're drinking his best rum. Steve Clemens of America, used to be of New America. He's, I think he is on the Hill now, but we're sitting there, and Alarcon says, you have to remember, you always have to remember that even a dying elephant can thrash a lot of grass. I always remember that, because there are a lot of people in the world don't realize this dying elephant can thrash them to death before it goes.
In Washington, they're saying that they don't send weapons to Israel anymore. And do you think it's because of 2024? Because how does it make sense to you, or they're trying to play a political game?
Even if they weren't, even if they were absolutely right and not lying about they're not sending weapons to Israel anymore, it either means, one, Israel has said they don't need any more, they got plenty enough to rape, pillage, and plunder, or two, they've talked Riyadh into doing it, and they're just funneling them through Riyadh, which wouldn't be hard with MBS. So that's meaningless to me until you go on television in front of the American people and you say, Mr. Netanyahu, you are not getting another bullet, another C ration or MRE, meal ready to eat, another hospital item. You're not getting anything that will enable you to wage this war any further from me, period. In fact, I'm cutting off the pipeline as it is now. You won't even get what's in the pipeline. Until he does that, I don't believe a word he says. I know how they cheat. Hell, I helped them cheat.
Larry, to wrap up this session, I want to talk about a very interesting country that is it's so similar to Turkey and Erdogan. And this country is huge, India. The same role. They're so smart. They're seeking their way of living, their way of getting advantage from both sides, from BRICS, from G7. How do you see the role of India in this whole situation? We have many conflicts in this world right now. How do you see their role?
They have two, well, they have more than two, certainly, but I'm no expert on India, but I have had a lot of experience with the relations between China and India and between the US and India. And they have two significant challenges, in my view. One is their population. And Modi has exacerbated that challenge majorly because he's essentially become a racist, and his political platform is racism in order to get reelected, which is not good. And it's not just not good for ethical or moral reasons. It's not good because the largest Muslim population in the world, I think it's even bigger than Indonesia's, is who he's oppressing. So that's not good to be oppressing that huge segment of your population in the way he's doing it. And the second problem he has is China. And I remember some really deeply disturbing discussions with my Chinese counterparts, and then later with my Indian counterparts in Delhi, about those relations and how, for example, visceral the attacks were on the border up in the mountains, and how each side was losing people, you know, 10 or 12 soldiers every now and then, or more frequently than every now and then, and how much the hatred existed up there, and how the line would shift, and India would take the shift and defend it, and then the Chinese would overwhelm the defense, and then the Indians would back up, recalculate, go over here and push the line a little bit. I mean, they really have some tension, and they all understand that they're 1 billion people each, and both have enormous strategic depth with, and the Indians worry about this. They worry about Pakistan and what would happen were Pakistan to suddenly decide it wanted to take advantage in Kashmir or whatever of preoccupation with China. So, you know, they've got a two-front aspect to it, if you will. So it's not an easy life for India, but like you said, they have had a pretty good life for the last 20 to 30 years, partly because of us and they're coming off the Soviet, I want to say, teat and coming over to the American, although they haven't completely done that. Their aircraft, for example, a lot of their Air Force is still flying Russian planes. And as I understand it, they still have integrated logistics packages with Russia. And so they haven't converted completely, which is smart for them. Don't ever put all your eggs in one basket, especially if you've got China on one side, Russia on top, and Pakistan on the other. So you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. You want to keep your arms sales with Russia too. So yeah, they're in a good position, but they also have a difficult time in the world ahead of them, I think. Not only feeding their people and keeping their economy going and making it even better. And, you know, population for them is going to be fairly constant, I think. The demographics are not, at least that's what I'm told by demographers. Whereas in China, it's a little bit dicey, as it is for us. You know, I was looking at the demographics the other day for us. One of the things that's a real problem for our recruiting, not only do we have a 9% propensity to serve, 9%, it's the lowest it's ever been in the polling, but we also have a 5 to 15-year-old demographic coming up that will be those to be recruited in the future that's considerably smaller than any such demographic profile in the past. It's not growing, it's diminishing. So that means fewer youngsters to recruit in the 18 to 24-year-old age group. There are other countries that have this demographic problem too. Some demographers are saying, like one up at the Army War College recently, that may be one of the most incredible challenges we're confronting right now, along with climate change, is the demographic change we're all going to go through. Now, immigration helps America with that, but look what we've done to immigration. So, you know, we're going to suffer a demographic burp, if you will, that's going to be bad for taxes, bad for the economy, bad for everything that goes along with a growth economy. Now, you could change your economy, but what are you going to change it to? Because no one wants to do that. So if you've got to keep growing in order to keep your economy successful, how do you keep growing if your population is sinking? Especially your working age population is sinking. And China's got that problem to an extent. I don't think India has it to the extent China and the United States do. So yeah, they're in a pretty positive position. And you're right, they have come a long way. The life of their people has come a long way. It's better. There's more food, there's more jobs, there's more work. But they still have those problems, and they still have China. And as they would say, Pakistan.